Hello, and welcome back to AI Ramblings with Neal Makwana and myself. We're at episode 18, and boy, again, Neil, I'm a broken record. It's summer, it's August, but
Yeah.
so much going on. Starting with news of the week, so much again, but I wanted to focus on a couple of things. One is just the importance of semiconductors to technology economies globally. We know that we saw the impact in COVID days in terms of used cars were more valuable because you couldn't get new chips for new cars and so on. But the reason I bring it up is for AI, with all the hundreds of billions of dollars being invested in AI infrastructure. The biggest problem that the LLM companies have is not enough compute. And all of that is obviously gated by chips. China has that problem and the US has that problem. And right now, because of the US China geopolitical framing, there's a lot of geopolitical tug of wars going on. Two news items I just wanted to use the news events as a way to frame what's going on. Number one is Jensen Huang of Nvidia, the critical company to make anything AI happen around the world, 80-90% shares of AI GPUs, is really trying very hard to get the US government to give it permission to sell again GPU chips into China. They got permission to sell the H20 chips, which were the less powerful or nerfed chips for China. Now they're trying to get their Blackwell chip also nerfed or made less capable into China, and the U.S. government is going along with it. Also, the White House, in its current deal mentality, they want a piece of everything. They want, 15. They took 15% of sales into China by Nvidia, by AMD. The legality of that, from a constitutional point of view, is not clear. So all of that will be figured out in the courts at some point. It's the times we live in, but for the of Nvidia, AMD, they just have to do what they have to do to keep the trains running on time and the revenues flowing. So they're doing these deals, and this balancing act that the semiconductor companies have to do is extraordinary relative to any other tech wave we've seen, driven by both the realities of the bottom-up tech business, AI business, and the geopolitical realities of the world, where on a bipartisan basis, the U.S. kind of views China as an enemy. And if you have that framework, then you have not only the Nvidia Balancing Act and the piece of the revenues that they have to pay the U.S. Treasury, but the other big news of the week, which is U.S. taking 10% stake in Intel for some of the money that the previous administration gave Intel and other companies, both U.S. and overseas, to build more plants in the U.S. So now, all of a sudden, the government's coming back and saying, oh, by the way, we want you to make everything here, but we also want, because we're giving you money in some of these cases, we want to take a piece of the company. That, ironically, is exactly what the Chinese government has been doing, and we've been criticizing it because they're the communists and so on. And they've been taking shares of all the Chinese major tech companies, golden shares and so on. And here we are kind of emulating that path for different motivations, geopolitical, national security, etc. But the underlying result is the same. So lots of decisions going on which are very extraordinary. I think they're important to not just note on a news basis, but the broader implications are very important to think through. And it's very easy to just let this stuff slide and slip and think, oh, this is the reality because of the world that we're living in. I'm going to go into one little rabbit hole. The tech industry is very, very fond of saying, we always look at things first principles. And first principles means you basically look at the framing and then step back from the framing and say, well, what is the wrong with this framing? And right now, in terms of the US-China relationship, we are stopping at the geopolitical tussle between US and China, or we can't let them get ahead of us because we want to be the number one in AI. And the framing of that is that China is an enemy. Ironically, China was a friend for 30 years. They allowed 330 million Americans to walk into a Costco and a Walmart and live on their average annual income 20, 30, 40% better than they would have otherwise if they didn't have all the goods and products coming from China. Almost anything today anyone is wearing or consuming has been made in China, and we've benefited as a society. Global trade is a good thing. And the first principle element that we need to be mindful of is that we are we are putting that to the side when we look at all these short-term tactical semiconductor geopolitical tussles. And it's important to kind of think about that. You love Nike shoes, you love all, sneakers and so on. Majority of that comes in from Vietnam. You're too young, but Vietnam was a mortal enemy. We put more bombs on Vietnam and Cambodia 50 years ago than we did all of World War II. Things change. Geopolitical changes. We dropped two nuclear bombs on Japan, and Japan became a huge ally. So first principles, we have to be rethinking all of that again as a country, as a bipartisan. I wanted to get on a soapbox and put that framework on, not for any political purpose, but in the context of the good of the global economy and the ability for technology companies, US technology company leadership, to actually do what it's on a major marathon run to do. We are putting massive headwinds with all this stuff, massive headwinds, and slowing down Ferraris or F1 cars that are just, designed to go 200 miles an hour and making them go 30 miles an hour. And that is a key piece of where we are on the news of the week. Let me pause there on that. Um, and then the other news of the week I just wanted to touch on, because it's part and parcel of this. So just so everything's out, is again a bunch of stories. We'll have all of this in the show notes. There was a big MIT study that said, 95% of the businesses experimenting with AI, their projects are not working; they're failing. There was an article again in the journal today, exclusive. Young people are not getting jobs because of AI, and so that's a short-term thing. But the long-term thing is there's actually good news in the news that the young people are getting new types of opportunities that were not possible before. So what I'm trying to highlight is that the other news of the week is this rising anxiety over AI. CEOs of companies large and small, again, a big article on this, we'll have it in the show notes, anxious about AI. And are they doing enough? Are they building their existing products and services and rethinking it for AI? Are they behind? Everyone from the leading companies to any company that's in any other space is worrying about this AI angst. And consumers are very paranoid about AI as well, because we've been trained by all the sci-fi and the geopolitical existential stuff that AI is going to harm us. And so this is a very weird time. And as excited as you and I are about technology and AI and so on, it's very important to highlight this angst period, AI angst period. So that is the other element of the news of the week that I wanted to highlight. So those key news items that we've highlighted, we'll have in the show notes. This is the broader framing of those issues. So I'll pause there
Yeah.
and get
Um,
you a chance
a
to.
couple thoughts on that. Yeah, I mean, starting off with the whole geopolitical thing, we kind of touched on this last week with the conversation of how there was a growing sentiment in Silicon Valley that the way founders and companies are approaching AI is more from how do we get to AGI first, and less of a how are we integrating this into everyday life. And we discussed that China has arguably done a far better job of integrating this into finance and health and tech in a way that they've educated the consumers there in a way where there's maybe a little bit less fear of AGI, but also educating people on what these tools are and how they can be used. And I think this is some of the thing that is this concept of having to beat China or having to get ahead. I think it's very easy to get into that and make everything a competition. Obviously, lose sight of the overall goal that we have long term, which is that this technology is super powerful. It needs to be handled in the right way, and if it's given to people and they're educated about it, it can really make people's lives a lot more efficient. So on that end, I think that's just something to keep in mind. I had a little bit more to add on this whole anxiety situation that's come up. I mean, there's been a couple. Obviously, the MIT study taking a lot of the headlines for this week. There was another piece actually from the Wall Street Journal where they discussed that a lot of AI's big leaps are starting to slow down, and that how this could actually be a good thing. Where we've kind of been in this, we're seeing it on every episode where it feels like we have 100 new things to talk about, not enough time to talk about it. We've been moving at this breakneck speed with releases and updates and news. And with the recent releases like GPT-5, where depending on who you ask, they might say that it kind of fell beneath their expectations of what it could be. I've talked to friends and I've used it a bit, and it definitely is a different experience than what 4.0 provided a bit earlier. and it's changed the way that I use the platform. But it goes to say that, maybe some of these slowdowns in model improvement and model growth provides a lot of these companies with a pause to actually take a step back and look at how they're approaching, their AI strategy and how they can actually make it useful to their consumers. Because I see it even when I talk to people a bit older than me. Whenever I explain them what I did for my undergrad major, the first thing they ask me is, "How are you using AI, and how can I use it every day to make my life better?" So, and this has reached a point where everyone knows that this is not only an emergent technology, it's there, it's affecting people's lives, and people, whether it's everyday people or large companies, are obviously trying to not get left behind, for lack of better words. But it just shows that, potentially some of these slowdowns also, it depends on how you frame it, but it could provide a lot of these companies to refocus their fundamentals of what they're trying to do and actually provide products that are, improving lives.
I think those are great points. The other element I would just add is that there is this perception because the media just needs a narrative. Is it's fast, it's slow. Then, and the reality is, someone who's watched technology for 30 years, it's never been faster. The innovation on a global basis. I mean, you've had literally a period where Facebook Meta was the leader in open source software, and within a drop of a hat, DeepSeek comes along 160 days ago, and then all of a sudden turns around the world of open source up and down. The technology changes that have to be thought through are just massive. Regular people, this is not what they traffic in every day, so they don't appreciate that. So the narrative, as the major newspapers and so on will write it, will be the narrative. But please, and we write about this every day to kind of put context on it. That is just noise in terms of, oh, this is slow, it's fast. The products are so incredibly capable, but they're so opaque because no one knows what GPT-5 really can do. And we just use it when the companies release them, they just put out the benchmarks, and no civilian cares about the benchmark. Or this against this physics test, or this thing against this math test, etc. That's not what regular mainstream people do, and all of those are gamed. It's a made up game. The underlying capability of the products are far more capable. They've advanced far more than the previous versions. It's just that I don't think people have had, even the people who have built these things don't barely understand what these things are capable of. We have to pause a little bit on the breathless analyzing and judgment of which fast, we're slow, etc. And just take a look at every month the new stuff that's coming along, and just figure out for yourself, if you care, to how useful or it isn't relative to things. And the other thing I'll just point out is that most of these companies have yet to productize this stuff. They've not added all the bells and whistles to really make it so that regular people can access key features easier. We talked about this in our earlier shows, that it's just this big blob that comes out, and everyone just has to figure out how to redo the prompts and so on. So it's a very, very weird place, very different than in the early days of the PC, or even today, smartphones. The Pixel 10 smartphone comes out, you can compare it against the 9 and the 8 and the 7, 3 years ago, and say, the screen was better here, da, 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 and you can, with 3, 4 decimal points tell you what the improvements are. AI is not like that today yet. It will be over time, but there's this rush to judge, which I think is doing us a disservice. So anyway, lot to think about in terms of the news of the week piece of it, which gets us to the main topic of the week, which is this, again, very tied to something that's been near and dear to us, Neil, on the show. We've talked about how there have been lots of concerns about the internet being broken by AI, that the business models are not going to work because search engine optimization is going away. Google, people are searching less on Google. They're going on to ChatGPT and Perplexity and other things. And as a result, there'll be monetary loss to the companies. And we've argued that, hey, yes, but everyone's smart. They want to figure out how to make money, and they'll figure out new ways to monetize. And sure enough, the new buzzword that's been invented, which I wrote about and so on, is GEO, Generative Engine Optimization, versus SEO, Search Engine Optimization. And there were several major stories around that came out that we wrote about and put up on the show notes. But this transition that AI, we are starting to see how AI companies are creating this new way to monetize. AI, using AI ad tools and so on. Very, very early days. But I did want to frame this GEO versus SEO transition as a main topic of this.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, this is something that we've of course talked about for a while, and this whole idea of we're moving from potentially an internet where humans are interacting with machines to where machines are going to interact with machines more. It's more of how can my bot interact with your bot and scrape what's on your site to provide me insight. And it's something that I'm, using and not cognitively thinking about every day. But even with, something like Perplexity's comment, the amount of times now I just ask it things like, what was that article I read last night about AI in this area? And I don't want to comb through my history. I don't want to look through my tabs. It's able to easily provide me this stuff. And, there's a lot of bot to bot interaction that's going on here under the hood, and it's something that people need to understand is fundamentally going to change the way that we're interacting with the internet. I think something to also add, I think again there's always doom and gloom around these things. We kind of just hit on this with, is this slowing down, is this speeding up? I think it's also important to realize here that this transition is often framed as a negative. Oh, there's going to be ad loss, there's going to be this and be that. I think it provides a way for us to also re-incentivize and redefine the foundation of what the internet is. Obviously, the internet's been around for before I've been around, and for more or less, it's remained the same in terms of how ads and whatnot have worked ever since the dawn of Google and such. So change is always a welcome thing. I think it also provides people with a way to find new opportunity, and that's kind of what's happening here. So it's something that, we don't have all the answers yet. This is obviously evolving at a super fast speed, and we'll just have to keep tracking it.
We don't have all the answers, but we're laser focused on the places where we might find them. One of them is AI
Yes.
browsing, which it's been front and center for us. It's totally part of this SEO to GEO trend, that the whole business of the number one application we all use for the internet, the browser, is fundamentally being AI enabled, is a big, big story. Perplexity, you've done a lot of work on it, etc. But the big guys have yet to even lay down their markers on this, AI markers. So Chrome, just now from Google, there were some news items on that very early. But there's also rumblings that Apple, in addition to its ChatGPT deal, may be using Gemini with Google, and potentially there may be a deal on Gemini being incorporated into Safari, which would be very big if that came to pass. And again, this is all in the dog days of summer, August. Come September, all of these companies are ramping up and trying to position announcements that they have to make, you
Yes.
know, week one, week two, week three. And so I just want to say, get ready. This is as crazy as this time feels. It's a break. Summer's supposed to be slow, and it is relatively slow relative to what's about to come. So the main topic of the week is this business of people figuring out how to monetize AI around the internet. Boy, we are going to see lots of new things, and new things on old things coming very soon. So why don't we move to our read of the week, watch of the week topic?
Sure.
And you had a good one to start to kick us off here.
Yeah, mine was a piece from The Verge, which was basically making the claim that AI doesn't belong in journaling, and this is something that I've recently started to do in the last couple months. As I want to be a bit more intentional with just compartmentalizing and thoughts and journaling every day and whatnot, and also this exercise of actually writing things by hand, because it is intrinsically a way to portray your feelings and emotions in maybe a more effective way than just typing into a text box or using voice. And essentially it builds on some of the new features that have recently been announced by Google, where you can potentially use some of these AI LLM models to help you journal your thoughts. I mean, I get, everyone loves to say that Apple's behind on AI, but almost every single day I go somewhere to do something, I get a notification from Apple's journal app saying, would you like to start a journal entry on when you visited the superstore the other day? I mean, it's just like, anywhere I go, if I take a picture, if there's any location data involved, Apple's wanting me to write a journal entry about it. And the piece more or less talks about the impact of AI and auto completion and like generative AI and how it affects the the process of journaling because, as we know, a lot of people journal because the challenge of seeing a blank page and having to fill it is a meaningful thing, which challenges you to think not only about what you did, but what you want to do, depending on what topics you're journaling about. And there's an argument to be made that AI kind of reduces a lot of that challenge and in a way that it might not be as meaningful if you're just kind of giving an AI some bullet points of how you feel every day and what you want to get done, and then it fills in the blanks kind of like Mad Libs. There is a lot to be said there, especially also on the handwriting pieces I touched on, where I think increasingly with, of course, these chat interfaces, the interface changing over time, people are more and more used to now just typing into everything rather than handwriting. And it's a process that is going to shift with all this tech. And it's another thing that we'll just have to see how it evolves. I'm sure Apple will have some additions also to the Journal app, which they released last year. I'm sure they'll touch back on that this year, and potentially even with the new iPhone released in September. But yeah, it's a trend that's changing. I just wanted to try and highlight it.
I'm glad you did. And it's a very well written piece. It's written by Victoria, who's a long time journalist. She's a long time journal writer. She makes a very important case. That basically, look, journaling takes work, and to do it well, she refers to books that basically point out it's not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be hard, and that you put pen to paper and put your thoughts down. So that's one element of it. The second is privacy and trust, which is a big topic that we've been talking about. That AI, by definition, is now scarfing all this stuff, and there are big privacy, et cetera, issues. I take her point very close to heart. However, I would basically posit that journal apps from Apple, now from Google, on the Pixel and Android phones, technology is a good thing because the idea is that this stuff democratizes this stuff, making things easier, whether it's auto completion, doing it with handwriting or typewritten. Those are details. They're important details, but they're details nevertheless. But the point is, if in the course of the 4,000 weeks that we all have on the planet, what is 4,000 weeks? About 80 years, or roughly, man or woman, we're going to be on this planet. Well, guess what? Those 4,000 weeks go very fast. And most of us, 90% plus, don't journal nothing. We don't journal anything. I'm the boomer in this conversation. And yes, I wish I had journaled a lot more over the decades. My memories, I'm lucky I had digital cameras. So, since 2000, since you came on the planet, that I at least have digital photos everywhere. But the point is, the technologies are allowing us to capture our moments and memories. And memory is very fallible. We make up memories. They fill in either the good things or the bad things. And journals are important. So my point is, if technology gets people to write down their daily things and takes it and doubles the percentage, even let's say, I dare say it's only 5 or 10% of people who actually journal every day, and it doubles it. That's a good thing for society out of 8 billion people. So I'm pro AI technology helping us journal. Yes, we've got to make sure it's private, it's secure, it's this, it's that. All those are details, and they're very important details from a product point of view. That's where people like you, the next generation, comes out and design this stuff correctly. But technology helping us do more of a thing we should do is a good thing. So that's my thing on this topic. It's a very important topic. So I love your read of the week. Mine for this week is this business. Every major tech company has the Mag Sevens have basically transformed themselves for the AI age. We've talked about it, and everyone knows the story of what Google's doing, what Meta is doing, what Microsoft has done, etc. But then there are a whole array of other major technology companies. One of them being Oracle, that I've been tracking since for 30 years. Its founder, Larry Ellison, is the second or third wealthiest person on the planet. His son just bought all of the networks, the Paramount, as a thing. The reason I pointed out is Oracle has gone from being a database software company to essentially the number 4 AI data center infrastructure company. They're a big part of why OpenAI is able to build massive data centers in Texas and hopefully deploy hundreds of billions of dollars worth of infrastructure. Nvidia is using them. TikTok, it relies on them in the US as an example. And so there was a very deep story on Oracle, on how it's transformed itself. And more often than not, they were actually not inclined to do all this, and they ended up doing it. And that story is a very fascinating one. So I thought it was a very good read. I wrote something about it as well. So I would highlight it as a read of the week. People just want to understand how this stuff happens. Even though people may be waving their hands on AI is going to be awesome, it's not always clear that AI is awesome, and people sometimes go into this stuff kicking and screaming. So that gets us to our next segment, Neil, our obsession of the week, and
Yeah.
this is always a fun topic. So you have
Yeah.
a good one as well here.
Mine kind of stems from this whole SEO, GEO conversation we were having a bit earlier. And obsession is maybe potentially the wrong term to use for this week, but it's something that was interesting to me that I've been thinking about and using a lot as I've kind of shown over the last couple episodes. But it's a Bloomberg article essentially saying that Perplexity is planning to let publishers share in revenue from a lot of the AI searches. They're proposing an 80-20 split where publishers will get around 80% and the Perplexity will retain around 20% of the ad revenue. It's something that, once again, it's a very delicate thing that needs to be implemented correctly, and it's something that's part of the reason I am drawn to Comet right now is because I can kind of bypass this whole idea of having to comb through the first 10 results in my Google search being ads and sponsored things, and I can cut right to what I want to get. How that'll change with this will remain to be seen. Obviously, there's been a lot of litigation and issues with publishers and OpenAI, for example, in the New York Times. I mean, there's been various things back and forth in the media about this, and see Perplexity taking a stand on what they want to do and holding firm in it is something we'll have to track. It gets rolled out and implemented into the product. I'll have to see how it obviously affects the user experience and if Comet is as pleasing as it used to be. But it's just something that, obsession wise, is more of a Comet obsession, but the Perplexity news this week has kind of reframed how I'm thinking about the product.
Yeah, look, every large language model and every company's they're figuring out how to compensate the content providers, the raw content providers, for the data that's being used for training, for inference, and then there's a lot of litigation around that, a lot of negotiation. Perplexity, I think, has been relatively smart, proactively jumping into this, and they want to go to the next level. So yeah, this is a good logical step for them to kind of try and redefine themselves relative to the open AIs of the world. So a good news item to kind of absolutely focus on. My obsession, I've talked about how the last few weeks I have been obsessed with going back to the world of cyberpunk, and then Cyberpunk 2077, the video game, which has been out now about 4 years or so. And I'm at the end stages of the game. And the reason I bring it up is because a relatively big controversy in the gaming world, especially large open role-playing games, etc., GTA 5, and now will be GTA 6, etc., and a bunch of others. A big trend, unlike movies and books, has been giving users multiple endings. And why is this important? I'm getting into the weeds here. So unlike your favorite movies, Jaws, it ends in a certain way. Couple of key people die, couple of key people live. It's wonderful. Star Wars, so certain things happen. There's a canon beginning, middle, and ending. With video games, for a long time, for decades, there have been multiple endings, and it's a very, I've always found it a very frustrating thing. The gaming companies basically said, "Hey, we can do this. It's digital, and people get the chance to do every which way." And this has been controversial. GTA has its controversies. Mass Effect was, people who are gamers will know what I'm talking about. Had big controversies on multiple ending, and sure enough, Cyberpunk, 13 endings, actually 9 main endings, but 13 variations. Okay. Just what, and today, thanks to YouTube and stuff, you can watch hours of video. And that's what I ended up watching more YouTube videos than playing the dang game to just understand the consequences of doing this versus that and saying this versus that. And it's so stressful. And it made me want the normalcy of regular media. Just tell me the story the way you want it to end, and then I'll deal with it. I'm grown up. And so this business of multiple endings is an important one. I only bring it up in the gaming context because AI is going to make this problem far worse. Because what's been restricted to gaming, multiple endings, I'm fearing that it will come to everything. In other words,
Yes.
movie companies will say, we'll give you 6 different endings because AI can generate it. We can make the same actors say different things at the end. And if you want them to fall in love with this one or walk away from that one or beat up this one, and you can have it all. And you can have multiple versions. I mean, you and I talk about movies. We're both movie buffs. And we talk about director's cuts and in terms of Blade Runner and all these other things. So yeah, in this case, because technology will make it easier to do this, it will give us opportunity to do multiple endings in other forms of media, and
Yeah.
there's going to be good and bad. And we'll do an episode later on or how that multiple ending thing is coming to regular forms of media. And
Yeah.
so I just wanted to underline this because this has been an obsession of mine this week. This business of multiple endings in cyberpunk, and it's been driving me nuts. It's coming for us. It just occurred to me because of AI to a lot of other things.
Yeah, I mean, this is something, I recently watched a lot of the Craig Bond movies. We just watched No Time to Die last night, and spoiler alert, obviously the movie's been out for a couple years, so skip ahead if you don't want to be spoiled. But Bond dies in the end. It's in the title of the movie. It's been a big talking point, and that's why a lot of people didn't like the movie when it came out, and they still aren't big fans of it. I actually put it higher up on my ranking of the Craig Bond movies. I just think as a movie overall, I think it does a good job of balancing everything, and it's a really tight storyline compared to maybe some of the other ones in the Bond franchise. But immediately when we finished it, I usually watch these movies with my parents, and me and my mom are watching this one, and I loved the ending, and she wasn't a fan of it, obviously, because it's not a fairy tale ending. He dies, he has a family, don't get separated and whatnot in the climax of the movie, and it this is one of those things where potentially I can see a world in a couple of years where people are able to change this and they're able to pick an ending where he doesn't die and something else happens. And then that, starts to affect things like what does the creator of the actual art intend? A lot of things are also left up to interpretation. I mean, there's so many movies and TV shows where things are left a mystery intentionally for people to kind of let their minds wander.
And
It's
set up the
something that
sequels. And set up the
and, s-
sequels.
and set up the sequels. And unfortunately, I'm not a big fan of it, but we're entering an era where a lot of new movies and products that are being greenlit now in Hollywood are just, sequels and prequels and less original screenplays and original stories. This also plays into something we've talked about before, but this whole idea of tyranny of choice and how people are overwhelmed by how many options they have when they're trying to buy something, when they're trying to watch something. And this is only going to get exponentiated when they realize that they also have 100 different ways where the media that they spent hours even trying to figure out what they wanted to watch, now that thing can have 100 different types of endings. And it's something that even before AI has started to actually exist a bit. Netflix released a show a couple of years ago called Kaleidoscope, where similar to kind of a lot of these open world games, where you're given a set of episodes, each one has a color, and you can watch the show in any order. And depending on the order you watch it, the ending is different. And this is before AI, this is before anything, but it kind of leans into this whole idea of endings changing depending on how you approach the media. And yeah, so it's I don't know if exactly if this is a welcome change. We'll have to see how it adapts and how it affects media. But judging by current trends and how overwhelmed people already feel with I mean, you just touched on it yourself where I'm sure you almost wanted to stop playing the game just because of
I
how
did.
many options.
I did.
Exactly.
I am now at the point where I'm supposed to make the final choice. I know what all the choices are, and I don't like any of them, the 13 endings. I wrote
Yeah.
my own ending, actually. I didn't, the game doesn't allow me to manifest it, but I said, this is the ending that I want. I'm not going to play. And I just stopped. The game
Yeah.
is, I've turned it off. I'm not going to play the final things because, and by the way, no one cares. It doesn't matter. But in a movie, everyone wants to know the ending because then you can talk about it at the water cooler
Yeah.
and say, "Oh, well, did you like this? Did you?" But when you have 13, 15 endings, then there's nothing. It's just the characters, and
Yeah.
they can do anything they want, and it's just it's a frustrating experience. So
Yeah,
this
and
is
it's a
one person's
conversation
view.
we've had as my whole life. I've always stayed away from story games and open world games. I've always kind of leaned towards sports games or first person shooters like Call of Duty, Fortnite, whatnot. And this is kind of subconsciously now that we're having the conversation. This is part of the reason. It's just because I'm already inundated with so much choice that an open world game where I'm having to make decisions on top of the decisions I'm having to make in everyday life is just something I wouldn't voluntarily want to put myself in the crossroads of. And I guess this is kind of highlighted here,
No,
but who knows? People like my mom
I
who don't like any
yeah.
endings might enjoy this. So
Yeah. The one thing I will say to you is play every one of them and just stop at the last crazy bit because the story, if they're done well, Red Dead Redemption 2, GTA, the stories that they do tell on the way, they're fun. The
yeah,
writers do get a chance to express themselves without the tyranny of, we talked about the tyranny of choice, with the tyranny of possible endings. If they, if you let them just do what they're doing and the stories are well told, they're awesome. And so by not playing the games, you're actually losing out
Yes.
98% of the content that's actually bloody awesome, and you should enjoy it. Just like any
Yeah.
book or any movie, etc., and not say, "Oh, I because of the ending." No, if you're really frustrated, well, just stop the way I did. I'm not going to play the last mission, and that's it.
Yeah.
By the way, the game actually, and all these games do this. They make you do the last mission, whatever you pick your one of 13 endings, and then you do whatever, and then it drops you back to the autosave right before you made that final choice, and then you can play, the hundreds of other gigs and so on and finish it. So I'm like, okay, maybe I'll just play it. But the thing is, today the one thing has changed is because of YouTube, you can watch all the endings. I mean, I spent over 3.5 hours. I mean, there's some of these videos with 3.5, 4 hours of it every ending. You're spending more time on watching the endings than you a regular movie. I mean, that's where this crazy world is going. Anyway,
Yeah.
so that's our obsession of the week, and that's almost at the end of our show. Other than our burning questions for each other, and for me, for you, Neil, my question is, since we talked about movies and books, and you've been doing a lot more book reading on Kindles and so on, and you've been doing a lot of movie watching, especially the Bond movies and so on. Tell me how you're thinking about the source of going back to the source material on the movies, because I know you're a big movie buff. The books are 80, 90%. I've not looked at the numbers lately, but majority of movies come from books.
Yeah.
Have you had a chance to kind of go through, certain of your favorite movies and say, "Oh, this is the book. I want to go read the book."
Yeah, it's a funny thing you bring up because it's something that I've recently decided to potentially dive into with these Bond movies I've watched, just because some of these stories, almost all of them, are adapted from Ian Fleming's original novels, and
Totally.
um I've not only read but I've also
Doctor
heard.
No, Casino Royale.
Exactly. Yeah, but it's something that I've heard time and time again, that if you like the movies, wait till you read the books. And this is something, across all types of media. So even things like Jaws, which is a movie I love, and we've
Oh,
watched a couple times before.
the
That's
book
a
is
book I need to read.
amazing. Dune,
Exactly.
the book, Neil, the
Exactly.
book.
So
Oh my God.
I'll have to put a pin in this one and get back after I've read a couple of them. But
Thank you.
it is something that I've been trying to explore. Yes,
It's those are extraordinary things to.
for sure.
You have a. I wish I could erase my brain and then reread the books, because some of them are
Yeah.
so bloody amazing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so I can go and kick off mine, and then we'll probably be at time there. But my question was, this is something we touched on a bit, and it's kind of been the overarching theme of today's episode. But my question was, what amount of your searches would you say, if you would just give me a rough estimate, go through AI first search engines, Perplexity and whatnot, versus a Google? Before I let you answer, I'll just kind of explain my habit and how it's changed. When a lot of this came out, I was very, very against going to ChatGPT or Perplexity to get my search results, is because I was like, hey, there's hallucinations. It's not something that I want to have to comb through and read sources. I'd rather just get a Google result and then have to assess it for myself. But recently, I have, I'd say maybe 70-30. It's 70% of my searches are now going through a chat GPT or Perplexity, and around 30 are where I'm actually going to Google intentionally to get a Google search result. A, because it just takes a lot longer to find what I want through a Google search, and
Mhm.
B, just because I think a lot of the hallucinations and sourcing and whatnot has just gotten better over time with these things. But I'd love to get because I know you've been using Perplexity a lot longer than I have. So how are your habits on that?
No, I think it's a great question. One should always be asking that, especially if you're, student of technology like we are. And my favorite phrase in the English language is ebb and flow. One of my
Hmm.
favorite phrases, ebb and flow. And this stuff ebbs and flows. There's not a, because we tend to, with percentages, say, oh, this is the number. It must be it went from the year to there. It must be going there. Logical extrapolation. And that's not the case. So because it's new, yeah, reality is 50, 60, 70% of my stuff was chat GPT and Perplexity. Why? But because it was new. I wanted to try it. Okay. Guess what?
Yeah.
Now I've tried everything, etc. I'm actually going back to Google a lot more. And my only frustration with Google right now is that I'm frustrated that I don't get an even experience on Google. And I've said this before. Google, get the brands figured out. Smush them or whatever you want to do. Google, Gemini. Because when I'm on the desktop, on my app, I don't, if I'm expecting a certain way of the answer coming at me, I want that uniformity across the board. So once Google does that, 70, 80% of my stuff is going back to Google. I'm just telling
Yeah.
you that right now. Okay. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. because I love ChatGPT, but ChatGPT doesn't do all the other things I really wanted to do. Once I got the results, I wanted to put it into various docs. I wanted to do these other things, and until they figure out how to make it do it easy, they're working on it. I'm not going to do that. Yeah, I like Perplexity for the way they present their answers and so on. So I use that, especially, I talked about how I've used it for, gaming hints and all that. But the Googles of the world are going to come back to that. So ebb and flow. If you ask me this question probably in 2 or 3 months, I will probably have flowed back to mostly Google, just because the integration piece of
Mhm.
everything, and it's good enough. That's the other thing we've talked about last week, about good enough, and Gemini is good enough. And so I just wanted to highlight that, because it's not a the companies that are coming, the new ones, are doing extraordinary things. I applaud them for that, but they got a long way to do, and they're just at base camp at Mount Everest in terms of the
Mhm.
work they have to do. There's a lot of climbing, and I'd rather be already further up the mountain with Google on a bunch of these things than go along for the climb from base camp 1 to 2, 3, 4 on Perplexity and these other things. So not that that doesn't mean I won't keep trying them and assessing them, because that's our job. We do that, but incumbents have an advantage, and it's theirs to lose. And so they have to be laser focused on that. And sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Ebb and flow. I hope that
Got it.
is a
Ebb
decent
and
answer.
flow. It's
Okay.
perfect.
Well, I want to thank again everyone for joining us for episode 18. August is almost done, and we're on to Labor Day. So a lot of new things. We'll be accelerating things into the new fall season. And again, thank you all for joining us. Again, as usual, like, subscribe, questions, feedback. We would welcome that. And as always, stay tuned. Thank you for joining us.
See you next time.